Such vulnerabilities are coupled with deep-seated, if exaggerated, anxieties about the possibility of Western-inspired regime change, loss of great power status, and even military attack. Wow, exaggerated. Okay, this document is all about
exaggerated. So, in order to fix this issue, we are going to inspire regime change, from the West.
Right.
We're going to diminish and even hopefully help them lose their great power status, and if necessary, we'll attack them militarily.
Despite these vulnerabilities and anxieties, Russia remains a powerful country that still manages to be a U.S. peer competitor in a few key domains, and that is unacceptable.
Right.
Recognizing that some level of competition with Russia is inevitable, RAND researchers conducted a qualitative assessment of cost-imposing options that could unbalance and overextend Russia. Such cost-imposing options could place new burdens on Russia, ideally heavier burdens than would be imposed on the United States for pursuing those options. The work builds on the concept of long-term, ideally, right?
Yeah. Ideally, yeah.
The work builds on the concept of long-term strategic competition developed during the Cold War, some of which originated at RAND. A seminal 1972 RAND report posited that the United States needed to shift its strategic thinking away from trying to stay ahead of the Soviet Union in all dimensions towards trying to control the competition and channel it into the areas of U.S. advantage. If this shift could be made successfully, the report concluded the United States could prompt the Soviet Union to shift its limited resources into areas that pose less of a threat. The new report, the RAND Corporation proposes renewing the Cold War, because that was a really good time for us.
Yeah, it's a good time for everybody.
We've got a bunch of Russia experts on staff, and we need to give them work. The new report applies this concept to today's Russia. A team of RAND experts developed the economic, geopolitical, ideological, informational, and military options and qualitatively assessed them in terms of their likelihood of success in extending Russia, their benefits, and their risks and costs. Okay, first section is economic cost-imposing measures. Expanding U.S. energy production would stress Russia's economy, potentially constraining its government budget, and by extension, its defense spending. By adopting policies that expand world supply and depress global prices, the United States can limit Russian revenue. Doing so entails little cost or risk, produces second-order benefits for the U.S. economy, and does not need multilateral endorsement. Okay, so...
Little cost or risk, huh? If that's the case, then why are we doing things we're doing things, with enormous costs and risk?
So this is funny. This is something we talk about all the time in our geopolitics episodes, is that the West overestimates the amount of dependence that Russia has on its oil and gas industry. Or on exports for its oil and gas industry. All of its oil and gas make up about 20% of its budget, of its government budget, right? The taxes and fees and stuff that they get from that, and sales from its government-owned oil companies. But this right here is sort of like probably one of the things that helps underscore that false assumption about Russia. At the time that the United States decided to pick a fight with Russia, Russia's oil and gas revenue was assumed to be at around 50% of its government budget.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's something like 20 and decreasing all the time. Imposing deeper trade and financial sanctions would also likely degrade the Russian economy, especially if the sanctions are comprehensive and multilateral. Thus, their effectiveness will depend on the willingness of other countries to join in such a process. But sanctions come with a cost, and depending on the severity, considerable risks. So they did this also. But what this did was negate any of the possible benefits to the West of the previous thing, increasing energy production, because sanctions on Russia increased the price of oil and made Russian oil worth more. And since even though the sanctions are multilateral, the global community came out against Russia. That doesn't mean the global South did, who is not part of the global community, nor that its BRICS partners did.
Well, but that doesn't take into account the brilliant strategic move of sanctioning everybody, including
all the
partners.
Time for any reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. Increasing Europe's ability to import gas from suppliers other than Russia could economically extend Russia and buffer Europe against Russian energy coercion. Europe is slowly moving in this direction by building regasification plants for liquefied natural gas. But to be truly effective, this option would need global LNG markets to become more flexible than they already are, and would need LNG to become more price competitive with Russian gas, which that never happened. Like, the sanctions happened, the increase of oil and natural gas by the United States happened, but U.S. LNG is still extremely expensive, and Europe has not stopped using Russian liquid natural gas. They cut off the main Russian gas pipelines, and they cut off most Russian oil, but they're still importing liquid natural gas from Russia.
Well, there's
And
also
they're also still importing oil and gas laundered through other countries like Turkey, India. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, this, you forgot India. That's the key. They can just get all the stuff from India instead.
Right. Encouraging the immigration from Russia of skilled labor and well-educated youth has few costs or risk and could help the United States and other receiving countries and hurt Russia. But any effects, both positive for receiving countries and negative for Russia, would be difficult to notice except over a long period. This option also has a low likelihood of extending Russia. And it hasn't happened. Turns out Russians are patriotic.
Well, right. And, there is some of a brain drain. Yeah, some of that, but not very much. And people like a Pussy Riot might leave. But for the most part, I think you're right. I think, generally speaking, Russians are patriotic.
Yep.
Well, and also it doesn't help if your host countries hate you for being Russian. They're like, oh, fucking right. Russians, get out of my country. It's like, well, I guess I'll go back to my country then.
Okay. Geopolitical cost-imposing measures. Providing lethal aid to Ukraine would exploit Russia's greatest point of external vulnerability, but any increase in U.S. military arms and advice to Ukraine could need to be carefully calibrated to increase the cost to Russia of sustaining its existing commitment without provoking a much wider conflict in which Russia, by reason of proximity, would have a significant advantage. Oops.
It would need to be carefully calibrated.
Right. Very careful. Like, whenever Russia said, hey, please, whenever Lavrov was on the phone with Anthony Blinken and says, please just tell me that the United States will not place missiles in Ukraine. And Anthony Blinken said, we'll place our missiles wherever the fuck we want to. Careful like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is what a lot of analysts say prompted the invasion. The buildup, and I mean, if nothing else, the invasion has been successful in that as long as Ukraine is divided, it can't join NATO. As long as it is in any kind of situation, any kind of conflict with Russia, it can't join NATO. So even if there's a freezing along the lines and an armistice, as long as there's not a peace deal, then Ukraine can't join NATO.
Yeah, I would say that counts as it's qualified, but it is a success of the first order. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, let's see. Increasing support to the Syrian rebels could jeopardize other U.S. policy priorities, such as combating radical Islamic terrorism.
Just a little bit jeopardized, yeah.
And could risk further destabilizing the entire region. Furthermore, this option might not even be feasible given the radicalization, fragmentation, and decline of the Syrian opposition. Okay, so they did that, and it did destabilize the region, and it did create a hub in Syria for radical Islamic terrorism, and now there's a Wahhabist Sunni government in power, which has the backing of Turkey, that is actually squaring off with Israel, even though it was trying as hard as it possibly could to make peace with Israel. Israel just won't let that happen.
Yeah, that didn't take into consideration the fact that Israel hates the idea of peace.
Israel needs instability in the Middle East to continue to exist as a state. Yeah. If there were stable governments surrounding Israel, that would jeopardize Israel's existence as a proxy for the United States in the region. Promoting liberalization in Belarus likely would not succeed and could provoke a strong Russian response, one that would result in a general deterioration of the security environment in Europe and a setback for U.S. policy. That's probably true. And
Yeah.
Belarus is now in a union state with Russia, meaning it's essentially a territory of the Russian Federation at this point.
Yeah, like people in Belarus can vote in Russian elections, and I think vice versa.
Yeah, as long as they're citizens of Belarus, then they can vote in Belarusian elections. I don't think that Russians from anywhere in Russia can vote in Belarus.
Yeah, I think that you have to be dual citizenship, but dual citizenship is a feature of the union state.
Right. Expanding ties in the South Caucasus. Competing economically with Russia would be difficult because of geography and history. And that's sort of played out in the fact that in Georgia, they're having the color revolution that happened there failed. And now the quote pro-Russian, and by pro-Russian, I just mean the party that doesn't want Russia to invade Georgia, is in power still. Reducing Russian influence in Central Asia would be very difficult and could prove costly. Increasing engagement is unlikely to extend Russia much economically and likely to be disproportionately costly to the United States. Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Flip Transnistria and expel Russian troops from the region would be a blow to Russian prestige, but it could also save Moscow money and quite possibly impose additional costs on the United States and its allies.
It would also be a really, really, I don't want to say impossible, but very unlikely. Like, what does that mean to flip Transnistria and expel the Russian troops who have been there since the 90s?
I don't know what flip Transnistria would mean, except for like maybe expel all of the Russians from Transnistria.
Yeah.
You know, people that consider themselves Russians and want Transnistria to be part of Russia. Okay. Ideological and informational cost-imposing measures. Diminishing faith in Russian electoral systems would be difficult because of state control of most media sources. Doing so could increase discontent with the regime, but there are serious risks that the Kremlin could increase repression or lash out and pursue diversionary conflict abroad that might run counter to Western interests. Yeah. Creating the perception that the regime is not pursuing the public interest could focus on widespread, large-scale corruption, but it is hard to assess whether political volatility and protests would lead to more extended Russia, less able or inclined to threaten Western interests abroad, or to a Russia more inclined to lash out in retaliation or to distract, making this a high-risk option. Encouraging domestic protests and other nonviolent resistance would focus on distracting or destabilizing the Russian regime and reducing the likelihood that it would pursue aggressive actions abroad. But the risks are high, and it would be difficult for Western governments to directly increase the incidence or intensity of anti-regime activities in Russia. But I believe they have been trying to a certain extent. They're definitely, anytime there's anything like Navalny or Pussy Riot or any kind of protests, the U.S. intelligence apparatus is there trying to push it and see where it will go.
Yeah, that's true. But I have noticed the Pussy Riot and Navalny are like the two most recent examples of this I can think of, and this is years ago now. We're talking about this. Yeah. These are years old figures and events. Because whatever else you want to say about the Ukraine war, there really just hasn't been any noticeable, I don't know, homegrown opposition or whatever. Like there hasn't been anything that has really like made world headlines, except for what's his name from the Wagner group?
Prigozhin.
Yeah, Prigozhin.
His march on Moscow.
Yeah. Other than that, there hasn't been very much.
Which, funnily enough, we heard about that like it was all of the Wagner group rebelled and was marching on Moscow, and everyone was cheering on Prigozhin. And but it turns out that a very large portion of Wagner refused to go and actually deserted and joined the Russian military in the process. Yeah. Undermining Russia's image abroad would focus on diminishing Russian standing and influence, thus undercutting the regime's claims of restoring Russia to its former glory. Further sanctions and the removal of Russia from non-UN internal forums and boycotting such events as the World Cup would be implemented by Western states and would damage Russian prestige. But the extent to which these steps would damage Russian domestic stability are uncertain. While none of these... Okay, so Russian prestige globally has been damaged in Europe and the global north. But the exact opposite has happened in the global south. People who see the global north as imperialists and who engage with the global north with trepidation see Russia as a potential ally, especially the BRICS nations who make up 40% of GDP in the world.